I stood at the entrance holding flowers, and the woman smiled like she'd won. That day I stopped being polite. The paper around the bouquet crinkled in my hands, too loud in the quiet lobby. I remember the smell of coffee drifting from somewhere behind me, the hum of an elevator, the way my heart thudded, as if it was trying to warn me. I had come here with a soft plan, a small surprise, a reminder that after all the late nights and tired mornings, we were still us. I had practiced the smile in the mirror. I had imagined his face lighting up, and then I saw her. She stood there like she belonged, calm, confident. She looked at me, then at the flowers, and her lips curved upward. Not kind, not confused, certain. The kind of smile that says you're late to a story that's already been written. In that moment, something inside me cracked open. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was quiet, final. I was a wife, a mother, a woman who had folded tiny socks at midnight and waited up for a man who said he was almost done. I had trusted him with the ordinary pieces of my life, the grocery list, the school pickups, the small fears whispered in the dark, and right there, under fluorescent lights, I realized trust isn't something that shatters all at once. It drains out of you, drop by drop, until you're standing there, empty, holding flowers for a man who built a second life behind your back. By nightfall, everything he relied on was exposed, not with screams, not with scenes, with patience, with truth, with a calm he never expected from me. I didn't know it yet, standing there frozen, but this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of his unraveling. I walked out of that building a different person than the one who walked in, the woman who believed explanations, the woman who smoothed things over for the sake of peace. She stayed behind with the flowers. What walked out was someone who understood that dignity doesn't ask for permission. If you've ever been backstabbed by those closest to you, if you've ever swallowed your anger to keep a family together, if you've ever fantasized just a little about the perfect revenge, then stay with me. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment your own story below. This one's going to hit hard because that smile she gave me, I never forgot it. He used to kiss my forehead before work. Small, perfect things. A hand on the small of my back as we walked to the car. A text at noon, thinking of you, that made the day lighter. Our mornings smelled like coffee and toast and the faint, familiar curl of his cologne when he hugged me quick in the doorway. The kids' backpacks leaned against the hall bench, stickers half peeled, lunch boxes zipped with care. I learned the rhythm of our house the way you learn a lullaby. The creak in the stairs, the hum of the heater at dawn, the sound of his keys when he came in late and pretended he'd been working. It felt ordinary. It felt safe. I worked too, not full-time, but enough to feel useful. Afternoons at the school, volunteering at the library, a few freelance projects that kept my mind sharp. I liked order. I liked lists. I liked celebrating small things, a dinner we forgot to plan that turned into the best night, a birthday where he made me laugh so hard I cried. We had a picture on the mantle of that night, laugh lines, wine on the table, fairy lights that made everything look soft. He was charming. He still is, in memory. He had a way of smoothing a hard day with a joke, of making an ordinary Tuesday feel like an event. But charm can be a coat. It can hide a person's shape until you tug it off and find nothing underneath. At first, the signs were tiny. Little things I could tuck away and tell myself were nothing. A late text that arrived after the kids were in bed. Stuck. Will be late. A voice on the phone that seemed hurried. The way he'd glance at his watch like a guilty man checking his alibi. I told myself business got busy. I told myself, like a prayer, that marriage sometimes meant tolerating inconvenience. I told myself I was being petty when I noticed his phone screen light up and he put it face down so I couldn't see. I told myself a lot. There were moments, though, that nagged like a pebble in your shoe. I remember one birthday in particular. I had planned nothing, no grand gesture, and he insisted on taking me out. He left the house with a quick kiss and a compliment about the scarf I picked, and I hummed in the kitchen, expecting candles and a crooked little cake. He returned an hour later than he said he would. He came home smelling faintly of perfume. He said someone at work had been upset. He had to help calm them down. He leaned down to kiss me, and I tasted a trace of wine and something else I couldn't name. He saw the look on my face and smiled like it would smooth everything. "It's nothing," he said. I believed him. Another time, our son performed at school and I waited in the folding chairs, proud and teary. I called him when the performance ended. He didn't pick up. Later, he messaged, "Sorry, boss pulled me in." I sat in the car in the parking lot, watching parents gather their children, clutching my purse a little too tightly. He called back, voice bright and apologetic. "Crazy day," he said. "You know how it is." I nodded at the phone and told myself his day had been long. I told myself being married meant sometimes missing things. It was easier than the alternative, imagining that the life I lived beside him wasn't the only life he had. There were other signs, smaller and meaner. I found a sweater, his, draped over a chair that didn't belong in our living room. The tag still on, not ours. It didn't smell like him at all. It smelled of a different perfume, a different detergent. I folded it with my hands shaking and put it in the laundry basket like a secret I was trying to hide from myself. When I asked, he shrugged, picked it up from a client's house, forgot to bring it back. I pictured an explanation that fit neatly into the life we had. It fit, for the moment. He said, "It's nothing." I believed him. When small things accumulate, they can become a message. The late emails that were never mentioned at dinner, the cancellations of weekend plans with the bland excuse of work, the way he flinched when I prodded too close to his schedule. I started keeping a running tally in my head, not of grievances exactly, but of oddities. They weren't loud. They were a slow, insistent drumming that became impossible to ignore when you woke at night and listened. I remember sitting in our kitchen one evening, the house quiet except for the refrigerator's low hum and the clock's measured tick. The kids were asleep. He had said he was working late. My hand found my phone, and I scrolled through messages that suddenly seemed like a foreign language, names I didn't recognize. Threads with times that didn't line up with his in-the-office texts. I read a snippet of a conversation that made my chest tighten. "See you tonight." That could have been anything. I wanted it to be anything. I wanted the kind of explanation that would let me sleep again without imagining faces I'd never seen at my kitchen table. I tried to go back to how things were. Smiles, light conversation, dinner at the table, plates clinking, a cartoon on the television for the kids. I put on my best face. I was good at it. It's a particular talent, keeping the house normal while your inner world tilts. I told myself trust was still there. I told myself loyalty was mutual. I kept folding the small socks, kissing foreheads, tucking blankets. I became an expert at pretending. But the nag was there, a gnawing that held my jaw tight at night. It whispered uncomfortable questions in a voice that sounded suspiciously like survival. You notice the tiny things people leave behind, the scent on a sweater, the glance they give you when they think you're not looking, the pattern of office messages that always arrive at odd hours. I called it intuition at first. I called it worry. I called it 1,000 harmless names to keep myself from the truth I wasn't yet ready to see. The hardest part was the quiet, not the loud fights that show you all the cracks. Quiet is worse because it invites thought. It made room for images you cannot unsee. It took the ordinary and rearranged it into questions. I kept replaying the birthday where his return smelled wrong, the performance I attended alone, the sweater I folded with my hands like I was handling a fragile thing. Each memory was an accent, pointing to something larger. I wanted to believe. I didn't want to ruin a life. I didn't want the children's world to tilt. I didn't want to be the woman who chose suspicion over family. So I waited. I watched more closely. I asked questions that sounded casual and practiced. How was work? Everything okay with the client? He answered smoothly. He smiled and kissed my forehead in the mornings. He still brought me coffee in the same chipped mug. He was, in almost everything, the man I thought I married. That contradiction was the worst of it. The kindness that made you lower your guard and the small evasions that made the guard necessary. In the evenings when the house exhaled and the world outside our windows blurred into streetlights and distant traffic, I became someone patient in a new way. Not patient to forgive immediately, patient to listen to the small noises of my life for whatever they might reveal. Patience, I decided, would be my strategy. I would not explode. I would not accuse without proof. I would gather quietly, like someone collecting pieces of a map. If I was right, I wanted to be sure. If I was wrong, I needed to know that too. In a life built on ordinary certainties, proof was the only thing that would turn my doubt into action. But doubts are stubborn things. They find cracks and climb in. They make you notice a ring of lipstick on a coffee cup in the sink, a voicemail you weren't meant to hear, a laugh that stops mid-sentence when you enter the room, little spikes of alarm. I cataloged them. I let my hands feel the weight of each one and decided quietly that I would not be the one to be surprised. I wanted to believe. I wanted our life to be the one I had folded into tidy patterns. I wanted those small, perfect moments to mean what they were, simple displays of love. But the pebble had become a stone, and stones have a way of changing how you walk. So I began to walk differently. I paid attention. I listened. I recorded little things in the notebook I kept beside the kettle, as if evidence could be gathered the way you gather shells at the shore. Small, ordinary pieces that, when lined up, show you the shape of the shore you're standing on. I rehearsed what I'd say. I wanted it to be perfect. The bouquet felt heavier than it looked. Wet paper, stems damp and stubborn. The city was its usual blur, taillights, a bus sighing to a stop, the smell of coffee from a corner cart weaving around me. My heart kept time with the traffic. I told myself to breathe. I told myself this was a small, good thing, a surprise, a promise to the ordinary we'd built. The building looked like any other office tower, glass teeth catching the sky. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and printer toner. The receptionist's smile was professional, the kind you give people you don't know but want to make feel welcome. "Can I help you?" she asked. I said my husband's name and watched the elevator light blink. My hands shook just enough that the tissue slipped on the stems. I tucked it under my fingers and steadied myself. I pictured his face when he saw me. I pictured his laugh. I pictured the way he would take the flowers and say something ridiculous to make me roll my eyes. The elevator dinged like a small bell. The doors opened onto a corridor that smelled of carpets and stale coffee. My steps felt loud. My breath felt loud. I kept my head down until the facade door clicked open and the office breathed out into the hallway. People moved with purpose, laptops cradled like babies, calls clipped into earbuds. It all felt normal, ordinary, safe. And then she was there. She didn't barge in. She stood in the doorway as if she'd been invited 1,000 times. Calm, exact, the kind of calm that makes its own gravity. She wore a coat that suggested rain, a purse looped over one arm, and a certainty I could almost feel through the space between us. For a second, the world narrowed to the space between her smile and my flowers. She looked at me the way someone inspects a stranger's outfit in a mirror, brief, appraising, and a fraction amused. She didn't frown. She didn't shift. She simply said, with the casualness of a weather report, "You must be his wife." The words landed like a stone. I forgot to breathe. My mouth patterned for the practiced line I'd been keeping in my pocket. "Surprise!" And it crumbled into the air. "I am," I said, because what else was there to say? My voice sounded small. The flowers suddenly seemed childish in my hands. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to throw them down. I wanted to run. He stepped forward then. My husband, the man who used to kiss my forehead before the day began. He had that look men get when they are caught fumbling with a truth, flustered, apologetic, scrambling for a script. He started, and there was the sound of someone trying to patch a hole in a boat. She met him with a look I'd seen before, in mirrors I didn't notice. No tremor, no panic, just cool clarification. "We've been remarried for 6 months, she said. It was a statement, not a confession. It hung there like a plaque on a wall. My knees wobbled, the fluorescent light buzzed like a mosquito. For a moment, time felt slurred, like someone had rubbed oil across the reel. Faces blurred at the edges. The receptionist watched us with polite distance as if this was a small, manageable drama she would later relay at her coffee break. Co-workers peeked from glass offices. their expressions a cross between curiosity and the human, quiet hunger for scandal. He tried to explain. He reached for my hand, like a man reaching for a lifeline. "It's not what it looks like," he said. It sounded like a headline, rehearsed and hollow. He named names, times, excuses. He said business. He said stress. He said confusion. The words hung together, but they didn't hold. My brain tried to knit them into the version of him I knew. The father picking up kids, the man who left sticky notes for me on Mondays. But the fabric wouldn't take. She watched him speak with the same patience she'd worn when she first entered. Occasionally, her smile softened in the manner of someone who knows she's already won the argument no one else has seen begin. She held something in her hand. His watch, maybe, or a set of keys. I remember the small metallic clink that sounded like a punctuation mark. She didn't wave it. She didn't brandish it. She simply held it between two fingers, a casual claim. People said things then, little gasps, the sharp rustle of someone shifting weight, and I felt as if I were underwater, listening to the world muffled and distant. My mouth was filled with salt and coffee and a sudden, ridiculous image of the kids' toothbrushes in their cups back home. I thought of the small rituals of a life I'd believed was ours. I thought of how trust deposits itself in the smallest places. Who takes out the trash, who tucks in the children, who remembers the dentist appointment. All those little things were a currency, and my bank had been quietly emptied. He kept talking. He was good at it. He had a way with a fumbled sentence that could make you forgive him with a laugh. He tried the charm. It was a reflex, a default. He looked at me as if he could manufacture the past into an explanation. He asked me to step away, to go somewhere private, like a man trying to hide a crack from being seen. "Let's talk," he said, and the words begged me to comply. I felt something inside me split, an old self and a new one. The old self wanted the conversation, the explanation, the neat patch that meant we could stitch this back together. The new one smelled betrayal, sharp and close, and didn't want to be soothed by rehearsed apologies. My hands tightened around the stems until the tissue tore. Water sprang from someplace behind my eyes. I had expected anger. I had prepared speeches. Instead, I felt the peculiar gray calm of someone who has been waiting for confirmation and finally gets it. "Who is she?" I asked. And my voice was steady now because steadiness was the only armor I had left. He faltered. For the first time in years, he was not the first to speak. He looked smaller. He tried to get back on the stage of explanation, to make this a misunderstanding, a lapse, a mistake. People kept watching. The office hummed, but all sound was interested in the three of us. She didn't yell. She smiled, the kind of smile that says this is already hers. I walked out of that building feeling like I'd left a part of myself under the fluorescent lights. The lobby smelled the same, lemon cleaner and printer toner, but the air felt thinner as if something important had been taken out of it. Rain began to fall in a slow, polite way, soft at first and then steady enough that it drummed on the car roof. My hands were numb, not from the cold, but from the realization that my life's small certainties had been rearranged without my consent. I held the steering wheel like it was a lifeline. I remember thinking in short sentences because long ones would have made me cry. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the flowers against the pavement and watch the petals scatter. I did none of those things. He called. He said my name like a plea. I let it go to voicemail and listened to the message later, his voice shaking in a way I didn't recognize. "Can we talk?" he said. "Please, come home." It was an appeal and a demand. I stayed where I was for a long time, the radio murmuring something about the weather. The city moved around me. People returned to their routines. I sat there and felt like I didn't belong in the life that continued. For the first hours, I tried to convince myself this was a mistake. Denial has a comforting weight to it. It wraps around the edges of your fear and makes them soft. I told myself stories, explanations that would let me sleep that night. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she was a client. Maybe there was a sister, a cousin, a friend he'd been protecting. Maybe I read it wrong. I told the empty car and the empty street. I told it until my throat ached. But the mind keeps an inventory if you let it. It collects oddities. It files away the late messages and the unexplained dinners. That afternoon, I drove to my friend Maria's house as if guided by muscle memory. She answered on the second ring, voice warm and fast. I didn't have to tell her everything. She already knew something had shifted because I asked to come over without saying why. She made tea. We sat at her kitchen table, and I let the cup steam between my hands. She watched me the way only a true friend watches, without judgment, with a readiness to act. I replayed the day out loud like I was auditioning for someone else's disbelief. The flowers, the elevator, her smile, his flailing explanations. Maria didn't say, "I told you so." She said, "Let's prove it." Her voice steadied me in a way other people couldn't. She pried gently until the story opened up like a wound you didn't know how to dress, and we began the slow work of gathering what we could. That night, I scrolled through my phone until my thumb ached. Old messages, new messages, screenshots I'd taken for no reason other than habit. I checked calendar entries, receipts, the little digital breadcrumbs we all leave. A dinner reservation under his name at a place neither of us liked. A photo on a social app, cropped, blurred, but unmistakably him, posted at a time he'd told me he was in meetings. A check-in at a small hotel on a night I had stayed with the kids because he had a work thing. My fingers hovered over the screen. My stomach sank. Evidence is a slow animal. It creeps up on you in unexpected ways until you're surrounded. I visited the restaurant listed on the reservation the next day. "We had a booking," I said, voice even, as if I were asking for a table for someone else. The hostess searched and then hesitated. "Yes," she said finally. "There was a booking under that name, 2 people. It was marked private." She offered no detail, and there was no reason she should, but her confirmation was a hinge. I thanked her and left like a woman who'd just been given a key and didn't know which door it would open. Voicemails were small betrayals. I listened to one that had been left on my husband's phone, a voice I didn't recognize laughing softly and saying, "See you tonight, baby." I replayed it until the words wore thin and then played them again. The laugh at the end of the message crept into my bones. I walked the length of our living room with the phone cupped to my ear as if sound were a weapon I could carry. There were receipts, espresso in an odd neighborhood, a parking stub for a time when he said he'd been at his desk until late. Little things that were each explainable on their own, each defensible, each soft as dust. But together they made a line that led to the same place. The slow aggregation of detail is what does it. You can't overlook a dozen small things that all point to the same secret. You can doubt 1, 2, maybe 3, but you can't doubt. I remember the exact moment the doubt became a certainty. It was not dramatic in the way movies show. There was no thunderclap or sudden confession. I was sitting at our kitchen table, the nightlight over the sink like a small moon, and I opened an email he'd left logged in on our laptop. I wasn't supposed to be looking. I told myself later how crucial it was that I had a clear head. The screen blinked awake, and there it was, a booking confirmation, dates, a hotel name I recognized from one of the receipts, a card ending in numbers that matched a statement he'd said was for work. There was a short conversation thread attached, not the kind of professional emails he sent about invoices, intimate notes, a casual language you use when both people know the time they will see each other. I read it once, and then again. The words settled on my ribs like a weight. It wasn't an accident, I thought, and the thought formed slowly, like a stone rolling to a stop. He had a second life. Not an occasional lie, not a fluke, a life arranged in parallel, meetings, messages, bookings, carefully curated and kept out of the life I knew. The realization cut the last thin thread of wishful thinking. This was deliberate. This was planned. When that thought arrived, everything changed. There was no going back to casual denial. There was no sliding into forgiveness without the hard work of truth. I felt something in me that was not entirely bitterness. It was clarity. The clarity of a woman who finally saw the outlines of a thing she'd been circling for months. I could have stormed into his office and demanded answers. I could have confronted them both with a loud voice and broken things beyond repair in a way that would have been satisfying in the moment and messy forever after. Instead, I sat very still. I breathed. I folded the printed booking and put it in an envelope. I wrote dates on the corner in my own hand, like a ledger keeper. Proof needs to be kept orderly if it is going to serve you. I made a decision that felt like a small, hard stone dropping into my chest and lodging there. I would not let this be an improvisation. I would not give him the satisfaction of an eruption he could blame on my temper. Strategy, I decided, would be my instrument. Calm would be my face. Precision would be my revenge. I wanted him to feel small, I told myself aloud, the sentence like a bell. I wanted him to see himself as I saw him. The words sounded neither cruel nor kind. They sounded exact. They were not about humiliation for the sake of pain. They were about restoring the scale of truth so it matched the damage done. That night I made a list, not of accusations, but of facts, dates, times, witnesses, screenshots, names. I slipped the envelope into the bottom drawer of my desk and closed it, like a promise. The woman who had folded socks and smoothed bedsheets would return tomorrow, but she would not be the same. She had a plan now. I turned my private fury into a checklist. It was the only way to keep from unraveling. Facts, dates, witnesses, receipts, photos. All the little things I had been storing in the drawer like secrets now became the bones of a plan. I called Maria first. She didn't hesitate. Her kitchen table became our war room. Then I found Darren, a quiet man from the PTA who knew more about computers than anyone had a right to. He nodded when I explained what I needed without blinking. That nod felt like permission to move from hurt to action. We worked in whispers. The late-night light in my kitchen turned ordinary papers into something urgent. Darren sat with his laptop open, fingers moving almost casually as he traced timestamps, archived posts, and mapped messages. He said things like, "You can show a timeline. That's clean." He didn't encourage me to be cruel. He encouraged me to be precise. Maria printed receipts, circle marks with a red pen, folding them until they fit into neat stacks. She made coffee that tasted like resilience and passed me a napkin when my hands trembled. Evidence is a patient thing. It waits for you to notice it properly. A restaurant reservation became proof only when matched with a hotel stub. A cropped social post became meaningful when the account's geotag matched a time he'd told me he was in a meeting. Small things stacked into a pattern that looked less like accident and more like intent. Darren organized it into a folder that had a kind of terrible clarity, dates in order, messages in sequence, images that refused to lie. It felt methodical, it felt right. We built leverage slowly, not the spectacle of confrontation, subtle, surgical. I wanted the truth to surface in places that mattered to him, among colleagues in his professional circles, in the quiet places where his reputation lived. I wasn't interested in simple scandal for scandal's sake. I wanted accountability. I wanted people who relied on his integrity to see the real man he presented as reliable in front of a client and less than honest in private. Our first move was small and careful. A friend who worked in his office agreed to keep an eye out. She did not become a spy. She simply paid attention to the patterns we had cataloged and verified a few dates. Another friend mentioned casually at brunch that someone she knew had seen him at a restaurant, off the record. Those whispers are dangerous in the way they are truthful. Gossip without context can be messy, but aligned with hard proof, it becomes something else. It becomes confirmation. We planted truths where they would be found, but not in a way that could be blamed on me. An old voicemail was pulled into a conversation with a mutual friend who had been asking if I was okay. A calendar screenshot, innocent and mundane, was shared with someone who needed to know. A social post, relatively harmless on its own, was saved with metadata that told a different story. Each move had an obstacle. An ally would pause, uncertain. A file would refuse to open. A friend would warn me, "Be careful." I listened. I adapted. One by one, the little blocks of denial people kept building around him began to wobble. There were moments when the work cost me in ways I hadn't anticipated. At night, I would wake and stare at the ceiling. the list of names I'd enlisted in my head like a ledger of risk. Maria would watch me and ask quietly, "Is this you? Are you okay with how you're doing this?" I would lie and tell her I was fine. In the quiet that followed, the question would curl in my chest. Was I becoming the thing I was fighting? Was I molding myself into the kind of cruel cleverness I despised? That thought haunted me. It tasted of regret. It made me pause and measure each action by the scale of what I would accept for myself afterwards. Doubt is a wise sentinel. It makes you reconsider whether the path you choose will undo more than it repairs. I thought of the children's faces when everything broke open. I thought of dinners left unsaid, of the way neighbors might look. I thought of forgiveness and whether it was a balm or a blindfold. Sometimes I wanted to stop. Sometimes the weight of gathering evidence felt like cruelty. I found myself angry at my own hands for what they were doing. But then I would remember the woman's smile in the lobby and the casual way she held his watch between two fingers. I would remember lying awake and listening to a voicemail laugh that was not meant for a wife. Those memories hardened my spine. Our plan nearly slid off its rails when one of my allies faltered. A coworker who had agreed to confirm a date called me back in a whisper of panic. "They're asking questions," she said. "He's suspicious. He's asking who's been poking around his inbox." The rational part of me wanted to panic. The other part, the one that had become surgical over long nights, pivoted. "We play calm," I told her. "No accusations, just facts." We rewrote small parts of the script on the fly. We tightened the timeline. We shuffled who would say what and when. The risk felt enormous. If this fell apart now, the pieces we had gathered could be dismissed as revenge rather than truth. I could lose custody of my dignity. I could lose more. He called that evening, his voice honeyed and quick, as if handcrafted to disarm. He used charm like an umbrella. He said all the things men say to cushion the blow: remorse, confusion, promises of change. He tried to be the man who could talk his way out of messy consequences. I heard the polite charm in the background like a radio playing a station I used to love. For a second, I wondered if I could forgive the glossy gloss of his voice. Then, I remembered the calendar, the receipts, the voicemail. I remembered the way the other woman's smile had been a quiet claim. I folded the phone away. That was the hinge moment. Fear and rage had both sharpened into something practical. I changed the plan's final act. We would not ambush him with a scene. We would build a quiet collapse, reputational and inevitable. We would present a pattern so complete that it would be impossible to dismiss as temporary feeling or marital squabble, and we would do it on my terms. So I recommitted. I tightened the folder, printed extra copies, and slid one into a little envelope labeled with a date. I rehearsed the narrative I would share with people who deserved to know. Not vindictive sound bites, not melodrama, just the truth, lined up and delivered with the same calm I had cultivated in the nights I sat under the kitchen light. I wanted him to feel small, yes, but more than that, I wanted him to be seen. I wanted the scale of his actions matched by the consequences in the places that mattered to him most. I looked at Maria and Darren, their faces lit by the laptop glow, and I felt a quiet, cold satisfaction. This was not about spectacle. It was about equality of truth. I had been patient. I had been quiet. Now I would be deliberate. I decided to make everything public, but on my terms. The room smelled like polished wood and spilled wine. People moved in slow, practiced circles, conversation folding into conversation, while a string quartet played something that might have been timeless. I felt the weight of the envelope in my clutch like a pebble against my palm, its edges soft from being held. The evening had been chosen for its noise, a company gala where applause would drown a shout, where clinking glasses would mask a whisper, where phones would be out and cameras ready. It was perfect for an ending. I had not wanted spectacle for spectacle's sake. I wanted consequence. I had asked a quiet ally at the company to do one thing. When the CEO announced the quarter's results and the room leaned forward, she would hand a single folder to the person at the head table, the one whose decisions mattered. I had rehearsed the handoff in my head so many times that the motion felt like muscle memory. Cross the floor, slide the folder forward, step back, and let the truth do the talking. The moment came in a blur, warm light, a clink of a glass. Someone near me laughed, and I realized I didn't hear it as humor. I heard it as the sound of life going on. My ally moved like a shadow, polite and unremarked. The folder slid along the varnished table and landed by the man with the microphone. For a beat, nothing happened. People continued to chat. Then the man opened it. It was astonishing how quickly a single piece of paper can change the atmosphere. The room leaned in as if a wind had blown. What had been background became foreground. The hum of conversation softened. The string quartet receded. The clink of silverware paused. Phones lifted. Faces turned. I watched him, my husband, lift his glass. He was smiling, practiced. The man who could diffuse a storm with a joke. Then his expression flickered. His smile thinned. His hand tightened on the stem. His eyes searched for me and found me standing still like a witness in a courtroom. The folder had been gentle, clinical. Screenshots, dates, a few printouts arranged so any sensible mind could follow them. Not an accusation framed in rage, but a lined path. Meetings claimed. Receipts that didn't match. Messages that unspooled a private narrative. It was presented not as a scream, but as punctuation. Someone cleared their throat. The CEO glanced down, then up, his face a study in disbelief. The woman who had smiled in the lobby looked suddenly smaller, the air around her collapsing inward. Her confidence fractured into quick, uncertain movements, the tightening of a jaw. A blink too slow. His voice went thin. I can still hear it in my head, hollow, a shape of a man used to being believed. He tried to talk. He tried to make the words line up as they had in the lobby. Business, misunderstanding, stress. He used charm the way someone uses a familiar tool. But charm is flimsy under the weight of facts laid out plainly. Colleagues shifted their feet. The CFO, normally taciturn, frowned and asked a question that held no sympathy. Phones recorded. A wine glass trembled in someone's hand and a drop slid down the side, catching the light like a bead of something precious lost. People who had taken him at his word began to look at the evidence as if it were a new exhibit in a case they had not known was open. Murmurs threaded through the room, soft at first and then louder, names said with a different tone. The other woman's smile faltered and then vanished. She stepped back, flustered, searching for a face to steady her and found none. My husband's attempts to deflect turned mechanical. The pauses in his sentences grew like cracks. He reached for a phrase, for an audience to trust him still, and found only the coppery taste of consequence. He was not taken violently. There were no shouting matches, no scuffles. Instead, a more civilized unraveling began. Invitations were quietly rescinded. A colleague who had been due to present with him exchanged a look and excused herself. People who relied on him for deals and trust closed laptops and whispered. The CEO excused himself to make a call, the tone clipped and efficient. In minutes, a professional distance wrapped around him, the slow, public version of being shown the door. He stood there, hands empty, and the room catalogued the fall of a man who had thought his private life could live in another sun. I felt something loosen in me, not triumph exactly, but a release that was not light. The air outside tasted different when I stepped through the doors later. Rain had come and washed the pavement clean. In the sudden space that follows a storm, ordinary sounds are sharper. A bus passed, brakes sighing. Someone laughed down the street. I breathed and noticed the breath was not the frantic intake of someone trying to outrun panic. It was measured, slow. Relief sat in my chest like a hollow where something heavy had been removed. I did not gloat. There was no jubilant dance, no cruel relish. The satisfaction was quieter and more complicated, like finding your balance after being shoved. I thought of the children, of the slow repairs that might need to be made, of the ways a household reorients after its gravity shifts. I thought of all the mornings I could teach them what dignity looked like, not vengeance for the sake of pain, but the firmness of refusing to be erased. For the first time in months, I breathed. When the noise finally settled and the truth stopped echoing in rooms that were never meant to hold it, I had to sit with what I'd done, not to second-guess it, but to understand it. Justice and revenge wear similar faces from far away. Up close, they feel very different. Revenge is loud and hungry. Justice is quiet and exact. I didn't want to become cruel. I wanted my dignity back. I wanted the part of myself that had been shrinking to stand upright again. The days that followed were smaller, quieter. The kind of days where you notice dust in the sunlight and the way the house breathes when the kids are home. He tried to reach out. Apologies arrived like carefully wrapped packages, each one promising change, each one asking me to forget. I listened because listening is part of respecting yourself too, but listening didn't mean surrendering my boundaries. Some things, once revealed, cannot be put back in the dark without costing you something essential. We found new routines. Mornings became slower. Breakfasts less rushed. I learned how to be present without pretending. The children noticed the calm before they noticed the absence. That mattered to me. Healing is not dramatic, it's repetitive. It's showing up to school pickups, making dinner, laughing at a joke you didn't think would land. It's choosing not to poison the well, even when you know how easy it would be. There were moments when spite tried to re-enter my thoughts like an old habit. I recognized it and let it pass. I had already said what needed to be said in the only language that would be heard. I did not need to keep speaking it. The lesson I carried forward was simple and hard-won. Boundaries are not punishments. They are declarations of worth. They are the line you draw when love stops being mutual. I learned that self-respect doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "Enough," and then backs that word with action. I learned that truth, when presented clearly, does not need embellishment. And I learned that choosing yourself does not make you heartless. It makes you honest. If you've walked through betrayal and wondered whether standing up for yourself would cost you everything, I hope my story showed you something else. That you can reclaim your life without losing your soul. You can demand accountability without becoming what hurt you. And you can step into a future that feels quieter, steadier, and more like your own. If this revenge saga gave you that rush of justice, smash like, subscribe for more epic tales, and share your revenge story in the comments. Click the next video box for another one.